Anne Frank, symbol of Holocaust victim. Anne Frank was an ordinary German Jewish girl who is well known because of her diary. It was first published as a book in Dutch in 1947. Since then, millions of people have read the thoughts and hopes of one young girl and have been inspired by her. She became popular after her death. Anne Frank, a young Jewish girl, her sister and her parents moved to the Netherlands from Germany after Adolf Hitler and the Nazis came to power there in 1933 and made life increasingly difficult for Jews. In 1942, Frank and her family went into hiding in a secret apartment behind her father's business in German-occupied Amsterdam. The Franks were discovered in 1944 and sent to concentration camps. Only Anne's father survived. Anne Frank's diary of her family's time in hiding, first published in 1947, has been translated into almost 70 languages and is one of the most widely read accounts of the Holocaust. Anne Frank was born Annelies Marie Frank in Frankfurt, Germany on June 12, 1929 to mother Edith Hollander Frank and a prosperous businessman father Otto Frank. Anne's sister Margot was 3 years her senior. Anne's father Otto was a German businessman who served in German army during World War I. Unemployment was high and poverty was severe in Germany, and it was the period in which Adolf Hitler and his party were gaining more and more supporters. Less than 4 years after the birth of Anne Frank, in January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and he and his Nazi government instituted a series of measures aimed at persecuting Germans' Jewish citizens. Hitler hated the Jews and blamed them for the problems in the country Germany. He took advantage of the rampant anti-Semitic sentiments in Germany. Hitler wanted to create what he saw was the perfect German. This meant that anyone who did not fit into his perfect image was persecuted, ill-treated, or killed. Hitler persecuted German citizens who were Jewish, Gypsies, or otherwise undesirable. By the fall of 1933, the hatred of Jews and the poor economic situation made Anne's parents, Otto and Edith Frank, decide to move to Amsterdam, where they established a small but successful company that produced a gelling substance used to make a jam. The Frank family was among the 25,000 Jews who had fled Germany for the Netherlands due to the Nazis' growing persecution. In 1935, Anne started school in Amsterdam and earned a reputation as an energetic, popular girl. In school, Anne was well known as the funny girl who liked to be the center of attention. Her math teacher, Mr. Kissing, was often cross with her for talking during class and referred to her as Mrs. Chatterback. On 1st September 1939, when Anne was 10 years old, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and so the Second World War began. But the Frank and all the Jews weren't safe in Netherlands either. Not long after, on 10th May 1940, the Nazis also invaded the Netherlands. 5 days later, the Dutch army surrendered. Slowly but surely, the Nazis introduced more and more laws and regulations that made the lives of Jews more difficult. For instance, Jews could no longer visit parks, cinemas, or non-Jewish shops. The rule meant that more and more places became off-limits to Anne. Her father lost his company since Jews were no longer allowed to run their own businesses. All Jewish children, including Anne, had to go to separate Jewish schools. In the spring of 1942, Anne's father had started furnishing a hiding place in the annex of his business premises at Prinsengracht 263. Between the summer of 1942 and September 1944, the Nazis and their Dutch collaborators deported more than 100,000 Jews in Holland to extermination camps during the Holocaust. Jews had to start wearing a Star of David on their clothes, and there were rumors that all Jews would have to leave the Netherlands. When her sister, Margot, received a call-up to report for a so-called labor camp in Nazi Germany on 5th July 1942, Her parents were suspicious. They did not believe the call-up was about work and decided to go into hiding the next day in order to escape persecution. And Frank's family went into hiding in an attic apartment behind Otto Frank's business, located at Prinsengracht 263 in Amsterdam on July 6, 1942. In an effort to avoid detection, the family left a false trail suggesting they had fled to Switzerland. A week after they had gone into hiding, the Franks family were joined by his father's business associate Herman van Pels, along with his wife Auguste and their son Peter, who were also Jewish. A small group of Otto Frank's employees, including his Austrian-born secretary Mike Gies, risked their own life to smuggle food, supplies and news of the outside world into the secret apartment, whose entrance was situated behind a movable bookcase. In November 1942, the Franks and Van Pels were joined by Fritz Pfeffer, who was a Jewish dentist. Life of the 8 people in the small apartment, which Anne Frank referred to as the secret annex, was tense. The group lived in a constant fear of being discovered and could never go outside. They had to remain quiet during daytime in order to avoid detection by the people working in the warehouse below. Anne passed the time in part by chronicling her observation and feelings in a diary she had received for her 13th birthday, a month before her family went into hiding. When the Minister of Education of the Dutch government in England made an appeal on Radio Orange to hold onto war diaries and documents, Anne was inspired to rewrite her individual diaries into one running story titled Het Acterius, or The Secret Annex. Addressing her diary entries to an imaginary friend she called Kitty, Anne Frank wrote about life in hiding, including her impression of the other inhabitants of the secret annex, her feelings of loneliness, and her frustration over the lack of privacy. While she detailed typical teenage issues such as crushes on boys, arguments with her mother, and resentments towards her sister, Anne Frank also displayed keen insight and maturity when she wrote about the war, humanity, and her own identity. Anne had to share a room with Fritz Pfeffer, which led to frequent arguments. Not being able to go outside was hard for her. Her diary was a place to vent, to brighten up the room, and put pictures on the wall. They covered all the windows with thick curtains. During the day, they had to be extra quiet. They whispered when they talked and went barefoot so they could walk softly. At night, when the people working in the business below went home, they could relax a bit, but they still had to be very careful. Anne and her family had been hiding for nearly 2 years. They had heard that the war was coming to an end. It looked like the Germans were going to lose. They were starting to have hope that they would soon be free. On August 4, 1944, after 25 months in hiding, Anne Frank and the 7 others in the secret annex were discovered by the Gestapo, the German secret state police, who had learned about the hiding place from an anonymous tipster, who has never been identified till that. On 4 August 1944, police officers discovered the 8 people in hiding. They were all arrested along with 2 of the helpers. It has been commonly thought that someone called the German secretary police to notify them that Jews were living on the Opekta premises. However, the identity of this caller has never been confirmed, and a new theory suggests that the Nazis may in fact have discovered the annex by accident while investigating reports of ration coupon fraud and illegal employment at Opekta. After their arrest, the Frank families, Van Pel's families, and Fritz Pfeffer were sent off by Gestapo to Westerbork, a holding camp in the northern Netherlands. From there, in September 1944, the group was transported by freight train to Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination and concentration camp complex in German-occupied Poland. Upon arrival at Auschwitz, Nazi doctors checked to see who would and who would not be able to do heavy forced labor. Around 350 people from Anne's transport were immediately taken to the gas chambers and murdered. Anne, her sister Margot, and their mother were sent to the labor camp for women. Her father, Otto, ended up in a camp for men. Anne and her sister, Margot Frank, were spared immediate deaths in Auschwitz gas chambers and instead were sent to Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp in northern Germany. In early November 1944, Anne was put on transport again. She was deported to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp with her elder sister, Margot. Their parents stayed behind in Auschwitz. The conditions in Bergen-Belsen were horrible too. There was a lack of food, it was cold, wet, and there were contagious diseases. Anne Frank and her sister Margot contracted typhus. In February 1945, they both died. Margot died first, Anne shortly afterwards. Anne Frank died at the age of 16. The exact date of Anne's death is not known, but it is thought she died in either February or March of that year. Both Anne and Margot were believed to have contracted typhus at Bergen-Belsen and died around the same time, just a few weeks after the camp was liberated. Anne Frank was one of about 50,000 people killed at concentration camp during the Holocaust. Her mother, Edith Frank, died of starvation at Auschwitz in January 1945. Herman van Pels died in the gas chamber at Auschwitz soon after his arrival there in 1944. His wife is believed to have likely died at the terrestrial concentration camp in 1945. Peter van Pels died at the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria in May 1945. Fritz Pfeiffer died from illness in late December 1944 at Neugemann concentration camp in Germany. Anne Frank's father, Otto, was the only member of the group to survive. He was liberated from Auschwitz by Soviet troops on January 27, 1945. After liberated, her father, Otto, returns to Amsterdam. On his way back, he hears of his wife's Edith's death. Back in Amsterdam, he goes to see his friend Mayep and Jan Gries, who help him during his hiding. He hoped Anne and Margot might still be alive, but then discovers that they did not survive the war. Her father, Otto, learned that his daughters, Margot and Anne, both had died of spotted typhus in Bergen-Belsen. Shortly afterwards, the family arrested Mayep Gies and Bib Boskugel, two of the people who helped hide Anne, and the others discovered Anne's diary, notebooks, and other papers in the secret annex. The following year, after it was certain that she had died during the war, Mayep Gies gave all of Anne's writing to her father, the only member of her immediate family who had survived the Holocaust. Mayep Gies had recovered the materials from the secret annex shortly after the Franks' arrest by the Nazis and had hidden them in her desk. Otto Frank knew that Anne wanted to become an author or journalist and had hoped her wartime writings would one day be published. Anne had even been inspired to edit her diary for posterity after hearing a March 1944 radio broadcast from an exiled Dutch government officials who urged the Dutch people to keep journals and letters that would help provide a record of what life was like under the Nazis. After his daughter's writing were returned to him, Otto Frank helped compile them into a manuscript that was published in the Netherlands in 1947 under the title Het Aquarius or Rear Annex. Although US publisher initially rejected the work as too depressing and dull, it was eventually published in America in 1952 as The Diary of a Young Girl. The book, which went on to sell tens of millions of copies worldwide, has been labeled a testament to the indestructible nature of human spirit. It is required reading at lots of schools around the globe and has been adapted at the stage and screen. The secret annex, where she wrote it, known as the Annie Frank House, has a museum dedicated to her life and is open to the public. Anne did not just keep a diary. She also wrote tales and planned to publish a book about her time in the secret annex. After the war, her father, Otto Frank, fulfilled her wish. Through her diary, the diary of Anne Frank, people all over the world are able to see what life as a persecuted Jew was like during the World War II, thus gaining an appreciation for the sacrifices people made in the struggle to stay alive. Anne's diary helped the world learn about the horrors of the Nazi genocides of European Jews. By the end of World War II, 6 million Jews were killed because they were, in Hitler's eyes, different. Anne Frank and other Jews were forced to think they were lower and inadequate to everyone else just because they had a different religious belief. Anne Frank is famous for her diary, which details her life while she was hiding from the Germans during World War II. It gives insight into not only conditions in Germany, but also what people went through in an attempt to avoid capture. Anne Frank quite clearly still sells. The Anne Frank house in Amsterdam is one of the Netherlands' most visited tourist sites, with people queuing around the block to see the famous secret annex. Her diary is the most famous document for the Holocaust, translated into over 70 languages. Thank you.